Welcome everybody to the third night of the inaugural Student Sports Law Network Virtual Symposium. My name is Hayes Rule and I'm a second-year law student at Florida State University College of Law. I'm also the co-president and the co-founder of SSLN. Last night, in our second night, we had a great three panels, first of which was look at NIL in Florida, and had some real movers and shakers to discuss, what that looked like and why they move forward with that legislation in Florida. The second panel we had was a look at soccer in North America and had some general counsels as well as an agent to talk about, how that sport is growing in this country. Also, to finish off the night, we had a panel of three general counsels in professional sports, and just got to hear about what they do and what their roles are, and how that's a little bit different than working in a law firm. The Student Sports Law Network is the largest known network of law students interested in sports law. It was started in late July and has grown to nearly 500 members in more than 100 law schools across 10 countries. The organization was founded by law students, is run by law students, and seeks to connect like-minded law students. SSLN offers students a chance to develop their voice in the industry, attend virtual events just like this one, and meet students who will likely be their colleagues as they enter this field together. And the best thing, it's absolutely free. We hope this virtual symposium will serve our members along with the general public. We're thrilled for tonight as we finally finish off this week of a great symposium. Tonight we have three panels, the first of which is a panel of three sports law professors, arguably the most prominent sports law professors in the country, and three of the most influential figures in sports law. Second panel at 7 o'clock Eastern will be a look at M&A in sports, and we'll have two people who have a really long history of doing deals in sports. Finally, we'll finish it off at 8 o'clock Eastern with a live recording of Conduct Detrimental, one of the best and top sports law podcasts in the world. So we're happy to have this symposium and finish it off tonight. And I will send it off to Dylan Harriger to get us started.
Thanks for that intro, Hayes. My name is Dylan Harriger. I'm also a co-founder and service co-president. Thank you all for being here. I'll go ahead and get started and introduce our panelists tonight. The first is Professor Brandt. Professor Brandt is the director of the Morad Center for Sports Law at the University of Villanova Charles Wigger School of Law. He is also a lecturer at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Brandt is a Stanford grad and earned his JD at Georgetown. In 1991, he became the youngest GM in sports with the Barcelona Dragons. And in 1999, he was named the VP of the Green Bay Packers. Professor Brandt was hired by ESPN in 2011 as a sports business analyst, and in 2013 by Sports Illustrated as a columnist. Professor Brandt previously worked with the Philadelphia Eagles and as a sports agent. Professor Brandt can be seen and heard all over the radio, TV, and internet, including Twitter and other platforms. Professor Feldman is the director of the Tulane Sports Law Program. He is the co-founder and the co-director of the Tulane Center for Sport and also serves as the associate provost for the NCAA compliance. Professor Feldman holds 3 degrees from Duke University, earning his BA, MA, and JD there. Professor Feldman has previously clerked for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, taught at UVA in Catholic law, worked as an associate at Williams & Connolly, and as the deputy executive director and assistant general counsel for the U.S. men's national soccer team. Professor Feldman is a legal analyst for NFL Network and a mediator and arbitrator for MAPS Inc. His work in sports law knowledge can be heard and read across various platforms as well. Professor McCann is a director and founder of the Sports and Entertainment Law Institute at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. He is a graduate of Georgetown, Harvard, and Virginia, where he earned his BA, LLM, and JD. Previously, he was a professor at Vermont Law and Mississippi College of Law, as well as a visiting professor at Boston College Law. Professor McCann currently writes for Sportico and previously wrote for Sports Illustrated, where he authored over 1,000 stories. It is well known that Professor McCann was the first media member to interview Lance Armstrong at his home in Austin, Texas, shortly after Armstrong appeared on Oprah. Professor McCann also authored a best-selling book with UCLA and NBA basketball player Ed O'Bannon. In 2004, Professor McCann was also part of the legal team that assisted Maurice Clarett in challenging the NFL age eligibility rule. Professor McCann's work can be also heard, read, and seen across almost every platform. So with that, I thank all the panelists for joining us. And thank you all for being here as well. And we'll go ahead and go into the first question here. And I'll start with Professor McCann on this one. And so basically there have been recent changes in the sports law field, especially over the past couple of years, probably none bigger than name, image, and likeness, and some of the states passing legislation and now federal bills coming into play. How do you see this shaking out, and what new sports law jobs do you believe may come from it?
Well, thank you, Dylan, for having me. And also, it's an honor to be with everyone here tonight. And I think after those intros, Professors Feldman and Brandt and myself will hire you as our agent, because those are maybe the best intros anyone's ever said about any of us. So I think I can speak on behalf of them to say we're all appreciative of that kind introduction. In terms of name, image, and likeness, it's clearly a topic in flux. We know that 5 states have passed NIL statutes that will give athletes in those states the right to profit from their NIL. Florida's takes effect next July. Meanwhile, the federal government has at least contemplated a potential federal NIL law that would likely preempt those state laws and potentially also contain an antitrust exemption. I'm sure we'll talk about those issues as the night goes on. Though we haven't seen actual legislation passed, and nor do we know how either President Trump or President-elect Biden views the topic. And then there's the NCAA itself, where the NCAA in October proposed a number of freedoms for NIL, freedoms that the NCAA has historically opposed. So they've come a long way, but there are so-called guardrails on those abilities. For instance, a student athlete under the NCAA's recommendation can't sign with a sports betting company, couldn't sign an endorsement deal, and yet a college could sign a sponsorship with a sports betting company. So there's some tension there. And what we know is that in January, the NCAA will likely adopt some specific rules, and we'll see what exactly they say. And they would go into effect in the following school year. But if there's daylight between what the NCAA comes up with and what's in the state laws, there could be litigation over that in a number of directions. And then the federal government could enter the story if there's a federal law. So it's a very unsettled topic, but I think it's clear with all of that said, NIL is coming. And whether it's through the NCAA, whether it's through a combination of state laws or federal law, it's definitely coming. And the last part of your question was about jobs. I think it's safe to say that schools are going to need help. We know that compliance officers have some reticence about NIL because it's more of an intellectual property legal activity than a compliance activity. So in terms of skill set, I think we'll likely see some schools hire probably new law school graduates to work on NIL issues. And that, I think, will open up some doors. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Really great background information there and great answer. I'll turn to Professor Brandt. Obviously, all of you have started and run very prominent sports law programs. With that said, how do you foresee potential clinics or other education in the legal sports law realm with NIL being passed and trying to educate this next batch of sports lawyers who'll be working with these issues?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan, and same comments as Mike. It's just really nice to be with you guys and to share the virtual stage with 2 such esteemed colleagues and good friends in Michael and Gabe. Just echoing a little bit of what Michael said, I think NIL was sort of the big hot issue as we came into 2020, and then this thing they call the pandemic kind of took over, and everything related to anything in society or sports was COVID related, and we sort of got away from NIL. But in the background, as Mike said, it's going through all these changes. And I think when you look at change, what has to come is from legal, from lawyers, from lawsuits all the way going back, as Michael knows so well, with O'Bannon, and then getting into the Alston case and getting into something's got to be done, especially about the high earning sports and college sports like men's football, men's basketball. Then you get to the litigation side, seemed to be a popular political topic for both the state and federal. And we've seen so many bills being introduced, whether it's Florida, California, Colorado, et cetera, or it's the federal bills, whether it's from Marco Rubio or whether it's from Anthony Gonzalez, whoever it may be. So we're in this state now, and then we haven't even talked about, Mike mentioned the NCAA, they're going to do something. And I think as Gabe and I have talked online, that in itself is a big deal. I know a lot of people say, well, they got to do something. Well, the NCAA doing something is a big deal, and they will be doing something. So this has created a whole new area of study as well as a new area of employment. As Mike mentioned, compliance departments are looking around like, oh boy, we're already strapped, right? So compliance departments, as everyone knows, already strapped because every little waiver they have to figure out. It's not the big time basketball, football players. It's every other sport. They're trying to figure out the waivers. They're trying to figure out, can the parent do this? Is this a violation? If he has dinner at this place, but it's on the way to another place. I've seen at Villanova, our compliance people, and they do such a great job just meandering through all these rules and regulations. So now you add this on top, and this is going to create some opportunity. I think when we look out at where the opportunities are, we're going to talk, I think, as we go along about COVID, obviously, and about sports betting and about concussions and all these new areas that are bringing on different opportunities for sports law. But NIL is clearly one, and you can see it whether it's people trying to get in with athletes to say, hey, I can chart you a path for NIL related to your school because they can't do it. That's a violation. It's got to be outside. Or whether it's people coming into the school and presenting their opportunity to direct and navigate NIL for them. Real opportunities.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. Thank you again for being here, Professor Brandt. I'll turn to Professor Feldman. Similar question. Obviously, have a great background of it now, but at Tulane, obviously, one of the most premier sports law programs and oldest as well. How do you guys envision potential clinics or something like that with an opportunity like this? Or is that something that's too early to kind of say that would be something you guys would be consider doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I echo what Andrew and Mike said. It's great that you guys have put this together. Congrats on doing that, particularly during these challenging times. And it is fun to be anywhere that Andrew and Mike are. So hello to both of you guys. Haven't seen you in a little while, but I think let me back up just for a little bit to talk about the NIL landscape. And as you said, Mike and Andrew laid it out really, really well. The one thing I'll just overlay on it is I think that it's fair to say that the NIL changes will be the biggest change for college athlete rights in our lifetimes. And with that comes a whole host of potential legal issues. And whether that is the IP issues that go with what they're allowed to use in these deals, including the school marks or not, whether it's the tax issues that pop up, potential Title IX issues. There are just a lot of new issues that athletic departments, compliance offices have not had to deal with in the past. But what I think makes this so fascinating is, Andrew mentioned the Alston case. The Alston case, which is a challenge to the NCAA's broader amateurism rules, is being appealed to the Supreme Court right now, and not very many people are talking about it. And if this were a normal time, and this is anything but a normal time, this would be everything people would be talking about in terms of college sports. And yet it's there in the background, and it could be that NIL ends up being at the same time the biggest change to happen to college athletes in our lifetimes, and yet just a drop in the bucket compared to the changes that might come. Because if the lawsuits, whether it's Alston or the other suits that are being filed, are successful, then it's going to open the door to much more significant compensation than NIL deals. And those guardrails, for the most part, will be gone. It will be a much closer to a free market system if the plaintiffs are successful. So the what jobs may come out of it, there could be an awful lot of new work coming out of it. And I think the other aspect, just focusing on NIL again, there are a lot of agents who are going to have potential new clients. And those agents will not be able to represent the college athletes in their professional deals, but they will be able to represent the athletes in their NIL deals. So that's another job opportunity there. And then in terms of what Tulane might be doing for clinics, yeah, we're certainly thinking about how to benefit college athletes, how to benefit institutions in this space. The analogy I use is to the drug testing program for college athletes, where there are many high-profile athletes and many low-profile athletes who go through the drug testing process and who test positive and then need to file an appeal. And most of them do not have lawyers and are unable to afford lawyers. And I think it's a good opportunity for students in law schools to try to create clinics for college athletes who are not generating revenue and are not able to afford lawyers. Ironically, NIL will give them the opportunity to generate that money and therefore maybe hire lawyers and not have to rely on students. But I think there is very likely going to be a focus on these NIL opportunities from law schools, and Andrew and Mike can speak to this as well as I can, the shift in legal education towards practical learning and experiential learning. This is a great opportunity, I think, to provide some experience and some practical skills.
Absolutely. Very well said. And thank you for your insight on that. I'll stick with you. We'll kind of work way back the other way this time and with the next question. So obviously with COVID-19, many industries have struggled, including the sports industry and also the legal departments within those sports law opportunities with agency, et cetera, with a lot of things up in the air. How do you think this will affect the hiring process, particularly for sports lawyers or people looking to transition to sports law or students graduating trying to find a job in sports law?
Yeah, the analogy I'll use, and being in New Orleans, we've had a lot of these, but I would compare this to a hurricane. And I think we just have to withstand the hurricane. And we're still in the middle of the hurricane. And I think we had sort of the eye of the storm maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, but the winds are picking back up. And I think people need to be patient because for many employers, this is a time to just survive. This is a time to get to the other side. For some, this is a growth opportunity. And we are seeing business booming in certain industries. So there are going to be employers who are looking to hire people and have opportunities, whether it's around COVID or some of the emerging areas that I think we'll talk about later tonight. So I would treat this like nothing is different other than you're going to be doing most things virtually, but be patient and recognize that you may need to wait 4, 5, 6 months for the hiring to pick back up, but know that this is temporary. And the other piece of advice I'd give is take advantage of the fact that you have access to many more people now than you probably did 8 months ago, because there's an expectation that people will transact business over Zoom. So you don't have to say, I'd love to meet you for coffee next time I'm in New York. Nobody's meeting anybody for coffee in New York. Just, can I get on a Zoom call with you for 10 minutes? And people are willing to do it. So I think students should continue to be aggressive in pursuing the legal opportunities, but also be realistic that they may have to be patient in getting those opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Professor Brandt, do you have any other comments to add to that response there?
A couple quick things. And, when we talk about pro sports, as we're following, all of us, there's going to be some major changes ahead for player compensation in 2021 based on 2020 revenues. The NBA is talking about a flat cap. The NFL is talking about a severely diminished cap. So the way I relate that is there are going to be a lot of jobs for young incoming athletes. And I look at law, there's going to be a lot of jobs for young incoming lawyers because they're cheap. And cheap is going to be good as we have these budget cuts all over because of COVID. The other thing is really more of a general topic that I think we're going to get to later, but I'll just say it now. When you're trying to get in with someone, as Gabe mentioned, getting the Zoom calls is great, but I know all of us get a lot of requests from young people and students and law students. And what you really look for is what is that special sauce about that student, about that person? What makes them different? What do they have that, as someone like me, can sink my teeth into it? What is their passion? And don't just say, I want to work for a team. I want to work for an agent. I want to do this. Why? And what part of it? And what makes you different? And if you want to be an agent, why would a player sign with you? What do you have? And so I always encourage students to write, to podcast, to blog, to just show that there's a little bit more than the average student coming in saying, I love sports, I want to do that. So I think in a general sense, beyond anything specific about NIL or anything else, if you want to get a job or make yourself known, you've got to separate. You've got to show some differentiation.
Definitely. I think that's a really big part of it. Trying to set yourself apart and show your passion is a really great advice for all law students or those looking to transition into sports law. Professor McCann, I'll turn to you as well with how the impact will be for young sports lawyers or people looking to get into sports law at this point in their career with COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, and Gabe and Andrew's points were so well made. I would add that one is that we don't know how long the pandemic is going to go. I think that is an important piece of the story, and that Gabe really emphasized patience is going to be, it's always a virtue, but I think that that's more true now than it's ever been. We also, I think, can expect that even when there's a vaccine, we don't know how long it's going to be distributed. So the world we're in now, maybe the world we're in 6, 8, 10 months. And that's something we're all going to have to contend with, but it will be opportunity as well. It will be certainly being able to work from any location could be a big advantage depending upon where one is located. And secondly, we could see shifts in terms of legal work. Some of the big firm work might migrate at the same rate. Sports team now letting people wouldn't move away from sort of the premier, very expensive big law firms to using smaller or medium-sized firms for some of the work. And that could be, that's bad for some, but good for others. And if one's a law student, I think law students tend to gravitate towards sort of they look at vault rankings and they try to go to the top firm. That strategy may need some revisions as you think about what the legal market's going to be over the next year or two. And I would advise a student, think more broadly about potential employment opportunities. And I think both Gabe and Andrew would agree, getting into sports law right out of law school is always challenging. The Saints, the Eagles, the Patriots, they're not going to hire someone right out of, you could be number one in your class. They want a seasoned attorney. So that will mean using the time out of law school to build your skills as a lawyer at a firm is usually the most likely route to work.
By the way, one thing I'll add, my hometown Jets probably will hire you right out of law school. They need so much help.
Only if you're.
I don't think you need to go to law school, right?
Very, very well put, Professor McCann. And Professor Brandt kind of already hit on this as well. So I'll go back to Professor Feldman. What advice would you give to law students seeking to get into the field? Obviously, all three have a very unique path, and there really is no blueprint to become a sports lawyer. It's very different for everyone. So if there's any advice you could add to what Professor Brandt McCann said, we'd greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say that it'd be helpful to define what you mean by a sports law job, because there's different answers depending on the different aspects you want to go into. So think about, if you are a law student, do you want to be an agent? Do you want to be a general counsel? Do you want to work in the front office? There are different answers depending on which path you want to take. If you want to be a lawyer who works for a team or a league or a players association or a sponsor, I'll give the same advice that I was given when I was a law student, is learn how to be a good lawyer. Go work at a law firm or governmental agency. Just like with team doctors, they want really good doctors who then know sports. You have to start with the law, be a really good lawyer, and then apply it to sports. It doesn't work the other way around. There are lots of people who love sports and know about sports. You can differentiate yourself by being a great lawyer. And whether that's an IP lawyer, an antitrust lawyer, a labor lawyer, pick one, pick two. Just pick something, become great at it, and then figure out how it applies to sports. And every area of law at this point applies to sports. And there is no, as you said, definitive path. But if you want to be an agent, it's a different path. You don't need to go to a law firm. If you want to be in the front office, you don't need to go to a law firm. So there's different paths. And I would say that looking at the generation older than Mike and Andrew and I are, most of them fell into their sports jobs because in that earlier generation, it wasn't seen as a career. It wasn't seen as I can be a sports lawyer or I can be a sports executive. And so you have people, and Stan Kasten's my favorite example of this, who's one of the most successful sports executives of all time, just fell into it and sort of got lucky. That's different now. People, when they're in middle school and elementary school, say, I want to be Roger Goodell, or I want to be Adam Silver, whoever it might be. And as a Saints fan and Mike, us as Patriots fan, maybe they don't want to be exactly Roger Goodell, but they want to be the commissioner of the NFL. But these are very specific goals that I think you need to recognize that there's only one of those jobs in the country and somebody has that job and they're not advertising on monster.com for the commissioner's position. So I think you've got to be realistic in what you're looking to do and realize that it's going to be a long path, but become an expert in something, right? Become an expert in something and then apply it to sports.
Hey, Dylan, I'll add to that what Gabe said, because I think it's important to know that the changing nature, I'll echo that, because we're at a different time. You know, when I started with the Packers in basically running their cap and contracts, negotiating all their contracts and managing the salary cap, the people that were doing that in the NFL, really, even a year or two before that, most of them were just kind of general managers and personnel guys and scouts that sort of took it over because, you know, they didn't know who else to give it to. And then it just became like, wait a minute, these teams said, or these owners said, we've got to specialize in this. We've got to hire someone not from a scouting background, not from a playing background, from a legal business background to actually negotiate these contracts as a professional and to manage the salary cap as a professional rather than just kind of a sidelight for whoever was in management before. So that's one example. Now you've got analytics in the past 10 years where that was just kind of coaching trends. Yeah, well, they do that on third down. We saw it on tape. No, now there are people that are going through thousands of games and saying, this is what they do on third down. And so you just see the evolution of those things. So if you're listening, what's that next thing? There was cap, there was analytics, there's other. What's that next thing that teams need, that agents need, that general counsels need, that unions need, and try to forecast that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just one other quick thing to add on that note is if you look at the general counsels for most teams in the 90s and early 2000s and ask them how they got their jobs, I would say 9 out of 10 of them will say that they were doing work unrelated to sports for the owner or someone associated with the team. And then they said, hey, why don't you do the work for the team too? And again, they didn't set out to be general counsel of the team. They were doing real estate work. And all of a sudden, this real estate developer became the owner of a team. And they said, all right, you're my lawyer. Do this work for me. And that's not the path a lot of students want to hear because it's totally random. And so to Andrew's point, it's try to figure out what the trend is next, show that you can add something that a general lawyer wouldn't be able to add because you can jump right in after a few years practicing, whatever it might be, and help the team, right? Which was not the case the way these jobs were obtained 20, 30 years ago.
And just to add, Andrew and Gabe, we're talking about one legal counsel position for a team, and maybe they'll have another lawyer on staff, maybe not. They may farm out a lot of the work to a law firm. So we're talking about a really small number of jobs. Contrast that with our earlier discussion where we're talking about this new terrain of NIL and maybe other changes depending upon the outcome of the Alston case. The college sports job market for attorneys, I think, is already bigger, and it's probably going to get that much bigger as time goes on. So if you're a student, you know, if your goal is to be general counsel of the Yankees, that's a great goal. I think Gabe and Andrew and I would think about that job, right? But it's also one that's really hard to get. And there are other positions that may be just as rewarding that aren't necessarily as prominent, but you would have a pretty valuable experience. So be thinking about that. These changes that we're talking about in college sports, to me, and there may be changes in high school sports too, for all we know, in terms of NIL and related issues. So if you're a law student, be thinking about that as part of a strategy.
Absolutely. Really great insight and advice for all the students on here today and those looking to get into it. And since we're kind of on that subject, I'll kind of skip around and I'll go down to this one here where it says, we have seen some sports lawyers achieve a great deal of success by finding a unique role in the sports law market or just somewhere in the industry and doing it really well. What areas in sports law should law students keep an eye out for potential career ideas as we kind of like talk about starting your own practice and becoming really, really good at one thing? I often cite to attorney Darren Heitner with intellectual property and all the great services he offers, and being kind of the go-to guy for that. What kind of roles do you think law students could look to get into if they want to start their own practice?
I mean, I'll jump in first, which is always dangerous to be the first person answering a question, but I volunteered. The I think as a starting point, right out of law school, it is hard to start your own firm. So I would begin with the point that it's always difficult when you haven't had a mentor or someone who's in the practice sort of training you on the day and day of the position. And all law schools have become much more experiential. It's certainly true of UNH, Villanova, Tulane. It's true of all schools where they do more experiential activities. I mean, when the three of us were in law school, none of these things really were around, this emphasis on experiential opportunities. So your students coming out of law school are definitely more prepared for the practice of law than we were. But that said, it's still different being a lawyer. And I would always caution when I hear a student say they want to go, this isn't you, Dylan, but just a student, I've had this over the years, who want to start a firm out of law school, it's doable, but I would encourage that student to think about going to a firm first, at least for a year or two, to get some basic skills under their belt. But in terms of areas of law that may be relevant to sports that aren't sort of intellectual property, labor, antitrust, immigration is one. Immigration is a topic that is increasingly relevant in sports. It's also a very, very complicated area of law. I taught an immigration law course about 10 years ago, and it's challenging. It was challenging to teach. It was challenging to be a student in. Tax law, that's another field that attorneys in tax really are separated in the sense that they know something that none of us know. And as a lawyer, being able to market oneself as having sort of a unique set of skills, especially in terms of area of expertise, I think that gives you a leg up. It could help you get into sports. It could help you get into entertainment. So those are some things to think about.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. I think that's great advice, and I agree with all of it. And just to add a couple of things. One is that be careful in terms of choosing that one area or two areas, whatever it might be, because there's no guarantee just because you pick that area, you're going to become, one, an expert, and then two, a recognized expert, and then three, have that lead to a job. So just make sure you're picking an area that you're interested in and that you like, because you're going to be spending a lot of time in it. And I think Andrew and Mike and I can speak to this really well, that we spend a lot of time working on our jobs. And we spend a lot of time on stuff that's not necessarily directly paid. Back in my old law firm days, I didn't like much of it, but part of what I liked was that I got paid for every minute I was working, or at least I got credit for it, because I would write it down, right? Every 15 minutes, here's what I did. Now it's do something for 5 hours. I'm thinking about it, and I say, hey, somebody want to give me credit for working on this? You know, my dog comes up and licks me, and that's about all I get for working for 5 hours. So you're going to be spending a lot of time. Make sure it's something that you like and you can see yourself spending a lot of time on. Otherwise, it's going to make it really difficult. And there's so many different areas that I'm sure all of you who are listening can find one or two or three that you're passionate about. But I would make sure that you are passionate about it. And then just a couple other areas to add on, specific areas of law. I would look at privacy issues, privacy law. I think with wearable major issue, not only in sports, but just with employers wanting their employees to wear Fitbits or whatever it might be that tracks their movement. And it's one thing to track it during the workday, but if they want to also track them at night to see how much they're sleeping, to see what they're eating, there are a lot of issues that are going to come up with how that data is used, who owns that data. And that's not just something in sports, that's something beyond sports. And for most people, your first legal job will probably not be in sports. So think about how that non-sports experience can translate into sports. And there's lots of areas of IP and privacy. I would also think that Title IX just continues to get overlooked. There are lots of opportunities in Title IX. The ADA, Mike has written a lot about this, but the ADA and mental health and how that applies in the sports context, I think that's still somehow flown under the radar. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for growth. Obviously, just tort law and the concussion lawsuits, people are sort of acting like the concussion litigation is over, but it is quietly working its way through the courts now on the individual case level, at least for college athletes. So again, I could go on and on and on, but that's sort of just a taste of some specific areas that I might focus on if you're passionate about it.
Yeah, and Dylan, I'll pick up one area that's a little different because it doesn't sort of fit in the legal box, but I don't know how many people listening know Mike, Gabe, and I as either, I don't know, maybe both, you know, as lawyers, law professors, law directors, but also as content creators. And we are all content creators, and Mike is so prolific for Sportico. And I think when I look at opportunities for young people, content is king. And the one thing us old fogies don't know how to do is create a lot of visual content. And I think that's a real skill. Like, you know, one of my students is on the call here who's done a great job for me. It's just something that you can look at and say, wow, I can't do that. And, you know, my sons are into content creation. It's just something that for whatever reason, the DNA of us older people doesn't do well with. And the DNA of younger people is all in. I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about whatever content you put out, podcasts or columns or whatever it is. It could be so helpful. And sure, there can be legal tangents to that as well. But think about content creation because that's the world we live in right now.
Absolutely, that's great advice as well. And I'll transition into sports betting, sports gambling, if you will. We have 19 states have it legal now. I think another 7 have legislation's been passed. And from the maps and research I've done, it looks like all but 7 states have at least tried. And maybe the legislation failed at some stage. What opportunities do you all think will come from that? I guess we see companies like DraftKings, FanDuel, Sports Radar, different things like that on that side, and also on the state side with the gaming commissions for law and for lawyers. How do you guys see that playing out?
I think Dylan, you really identified where there may be opportunities. Certainly, DraftKings, FanDuel, all of those companies, casinos themselves, to the extent they add sports betting, which some are doing, there may be additional opportunities there. I think what you really hit at would be the state commissions, where a lot of these states are adding multiple compliance officials, and usually they're attorneys some of whom are new attorneys, where they are able to, it's just like being a compliance officer at a university, where the person has to ensure that a license is being properly granted by the state to an entity that's going to provide a sports wagering opportunity, and then monitoring that entity. So it could be a casino, it could be an online vendor, depending upon what the state law says. State laws vary on sports betting. Some require that there be a physical facility within the state in order to grant even online wagering. Others are allowing them more directly. There's also the topic of integrity fees. Should fees go to leagues because they're providing the games? All of these are compliance questions. So if you're looking to get into that industry, I would look at state regulatory agencies, which I know doesn't necessarily immediately sound exciting, state regulation, but a lot of the folks begin as state regulators and then get hired by the private sector later. So especially in the economy we're in, which is so fluid, and I think Gabe and Andrew both noted, first of all, your first job probably won't be in sports. And secondly, even if it is, it's probably not going to be the job you keep for many years. You know, that world is kind of gone. So I would be thinking about potential opportunities, entering opportunities with states that adopt sports betting. The DraftKings, FanDuel, from what I've seen in their job advertisements, they're usually looking for people with some experience. So if you've practiced for a year or two, you might be eligible to apply for one of those positions. But there's certainly going to be jobs there. Now, whether it's a ton of jobs, I think remains to be seen. But it definitely looks like a new economy that connects to the sports world and the law world.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. That was pretty comprehensive. The one piece I will add is the impact this might have at the college level. And I think it's one of those coming storms where there's so many other issues that come up with sports gambling at the college level. and privacy issues, again, with injury reports and just the number of people who will have access to these college kids and the vulnerability of college athletes to potential point shaving, match fixing, if you're able to bet on a D2 or D3 game where these players have no real pro prospects and it's maybe worth the risk for them to take a payment. So that, I know that keeps a lot of coaches and general counsels at universities up at night. So I don't know that there will necessarily be standalone jobs for that, but I think that's just another skill set to be able to bring, whether it's to a compliance office or to a general counsel's office at a university.
I think this is a good example of what Gabe was talking about. A lot of these lawyers were regulator lawyers for their clients. They were doing deals, they were M&A lawyers, they were corporate lawyers, and all of a sudden the world explodes in sports gambling. And now they're operators, or now they're working in some ancillary way with a gaming company, and they become sports betting lawyers. It's kind of like sports lawyers, where this is so new. They grew up as this corporate lawyer, and now they're a betting lawyer. There's so much of that happening right now.
Absolutely. Another area that's grown a lot and obviously has done well with COVID-19, I think one of you alluded to that earlier, some industries have done well with it. Esports, and it's something I think a lot of law students who want to do sports law kind of overlook a little bit. But the projections I researched is that the industry will be close to $2 billion in 2022, which is when a lot of us will be graduating or entering the marketplace. What can any of you say to the opportunities in esports and about that industry in general, if anything at all?
I'll start this one since Mike volunteered the last two. I'll give a broad comment. I think this is one of those areas where we can all see, and we've probably been able to see it for the last 5 or 6 years, that there's massive growth opportunity on the business side and on the legal side. And if I had to pick one area to go into to have an expertise in, it would probably be in esports and the IP issues and all the other issues around it, just because nobody has emerged. There's people starting to emerge, but nobody has really emerged as the expert in this area. And to both Mike and Andrew's point before, what an incredible opportunity while you're in law school to start gaining that expertise and then build on it when you go into whatever practice you go into. And whether it's being a general counsel for one of the video game companies or for the athletes, whatever it might be, there's so much opportunity here. And this is kind of the Wild West time for it. So I would be looking at every opportunity to get involved or to learn about the underlying legal issues, keeping in mind, again, that the legal issues you're going to be studying will apply beyond just esports. So it's not as if you're putting all your eggs in the esports basket. You're becoming an expert in IP that could apply to esports or to the NFL or to the X Games or whatever else it might be. But start with that broad platform. And I think there'll be a lot of people on this call who will be esports lawyers or working with esports companies in the next decade or so.
Yeah. Or do you want to go, Andrew? You want to?
No, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. I think Gabe noted that the leagues are offering esports, right? When the NBA has an esports league, that's a sign of the seriousness of the opportunity that could exist. And the three of us would all agree it is the Wild West, and there isn't a person that has staked it out, or even a group. There are some attorneys that are working in that space, but given its pretty exponential growth, there's no question there are going to be legal disputes, whether they're IP, whether they're contract, whether they're potentially labor law issues. There have been some litigation involving esports players and the contracts that they sign, whether there's adhesion in the contracts. So there is a lot there. Now, I think the tricky part, because it's the Wild West, is how do you get paid doing it? Is there a law firm that would hire you to work on those issues? Or do you have to carve it out on your own? And this may be a field where you'll have to sort of do stuff in an unconventional way that isn't the path that that has been normally pursued by people out of law school. But I would also, and I guess with that in mind, I would be thinking about, connecting with attorneys who are working in that space and seeing if you could get an internship and get your foot in the door that way.
I guess I'll just be a little sort of a word of caution. In other words, that I think a lot of young people want to get into areas that are cool and sexy, but don't really realize what the work is. I think a lot of esports attorneys are bogged down with everything we're talking about, kind of figuring out regulations and rules and immigration and statuses of these young people that are playing. And maybe some people think if you're an esports attorney, you're sitting around playing Fortnite. And I just think there has to be a lot of, it's like working in sports as an attorney. Sometimes you're just, working on some real estate deal, or you're working on some tax deal, or you're working on some deal with local politics. So I think people have to be realistic about what sports law is. You're not, not inside with the players on much of it.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that. I mean, sports law really is law.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that at the end of the day, can be difficult law. There are complicated antitrust issues. Look at the NIL stuff. It is complicated. And as a sports lawyer, you have to be interested. The sports is fine, but you have to really like the law. If you're only interested in games, then it's not going to be the right field for you.
Yeah, let me just third that emotion, because it's if you want to go into sports law so you can go to the games, do something else. Because even if, and Andrew can speak to this, even if you're going to the games, you're not going and having a beer and eating a hot dog. You're not being a fan. It just takes on such a different feel when it is your job. And I remember when I was a second-year law student, I got an interview with the general counsel of the New York Mets in my hometown team. And I went into Shea Stadium, into his office, and I said, this is it. This is the dream. If I can just get this internship, then I can get that job and I'll be set for life. And he asked me, why do I want to intern with him? And I said, well, and I had rehearsed my answer about sports law and labor law and intellectual property and antitrust. And he says, that's a great answer, but that has nothing to do with what I do. And he said, what I do is when a fan slips and falls in the stadium, I handle the lawsuit. When they bite into a hot dog and there's something that's in there that shouldn't be in there, I handle the lawsuit. I don't do anything with the players. I don't do anything with the team. And he opened up his door and he had a view of the field of Shea Stadium. He said, this is the closest I get to the field. Otherwise, I'm not around the game at all. And yeah, it's an awesome place to work physically, but the work I do is no different than a general counsel of a non-sports company, other than my letterhead is cooler than their letterhead. And that's fine. People might get excited about that, but it's probably not going to, that excitement will wear off pretty quickly. So make sure you know what the job is, to Andrew and Mike's points, and make sure that's something you want to do.
I think that's really, really good advice, Small 3V. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn over to our Q&A. We have a couple questions here. The first one is from Danny Bland at Villanova Law School. Danny, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, feel free. If not, I can read it.
Hi. My question is, what is the best route to becoming an NFL agent, and how can you transition from that into working as a team executive?
I think I'll let Andrew handle that one.
Yeah, Danny's my student. She didn't need to come here to ask that. But I think it's for the group. I wish there was a path. Always, it'd be easier to tell people, you do this, you become an agent, you do this, you work for a team. It's right place, right time. I was at law school at Georgetown University Law School, and down the road was a sports management company called ProServe. It's no longer, but I had a tennis background and they represented tennis players. So I kind of wormed my way in and said, I can help you meet some tennis players. And they took a chance on a young kid, unpaid, at law student at Georgetown. And that was kind of starting my path. And even there, I'm working for David Falk, who's like the king of the NBA with Michael Jordan and all these great basketball players. But we had a few football players. So I looked at it and say, okay, look at me. I never played football, but I'm like, there's a path because David is so invested in Michael and the NBA. I have a little path now. And so I became a football agent, and that led me to the Green Bay Packers and all those kind of things. So you just have to find your way. But as I pointed out with football, which was never sort of, you know, I had an interest as a fan, but that was the path, because you get in and you see, okay, that's full over there. That's full over there. There's no opportunity there. But football, there's a path. And wherever you can sort of make an inroad, you can see a path, and try to do whatever you can to take work off the desk of your supervisor, because the more you get to be dependent, he or she is dependent on you, the better. Because when there's a task, raise your hand. Those are the best people. Those are the people that advance.
Absolutely. So one last question. I think we'll probably eat up the rest of our time. You all obviously have great academic careers as professors and founders and all these things, also professionally as well. I think something fun would be to hear, what's your favorite professional memory, if you as working with the Packers or as counsel, or all the jobs you guys have all held, if you mind talking a little about that.
I'll volunteer Andrew to go first.
You know, I guess you're going to tee me up for, everyone wants to hear the Aaron Rodgers story. I mean, we had the most durable quarterback in the history of the sport, and Brett Favre, and, you know, two things happened that night. One, all the players that we rated as first round players in that draft were gone, except one. And the other thing that happened is that guy wasn't being taken. His name was Aaron Rodgers. So the last thing we ever needed for the Packers was a quarterback. But there he was, sitting there, the only name on our board that had a first round grade. So it was a combustible situation, let's just say, where a lot of people did not want to take a quarterback no matter what his name was, because they wanted someone, if you're in a sports organization, you want someone that can help you right now. I mean, you don't want to wait 2 years. So there was that element. And then there was the other element that said, hey, what do we always say, Andrew? We say, trust the board, trust our scouting. And believe me, that was a heated moment, because that really was an epitome of what goes on in organizations, sports or otherwise, present versus future. And a lot of organizations would have said, no, we're not taking a quarterback. We need help right now. We want to get this solved now. We want improvement now. And I get that, totally get that. But that was a key moment that I learned so much, because I really bought in. And I said, if we don't take Aaron Rodgers, we deflate our scouting staff's morale, first of all, because they spent 6 months deciding that's the best player. And then what do we stand for? You know, we're going to dip into our second round grades just because they don't play quarterback. So I learned a lot. Like, you stick to your principles, you have a foundational philosophy of your team, of your organization, and you stick to it. It worked out well.
I'll jump in. I would say, for me, working with Ed O'Bannon on a book probably was the most rewarding experience. And I say that because I covered and I wrote so many stories on his case from the beginning. And I went to the trial and out in Oakland, and just it became sort of part of something that I thought through a lot. And then to write a book with the actual person. I mean, it's one thing to write a commentary or an analysis of a case, but to get to know the actual human being behind it all was so eye-opening. And getting to know Ed's views about why he brought the case, getting to know his family, understanding, even though it's an IP antitrust case, in a lot of ways to him it was a civil rights case. And having an opportunity to see it through that lens, for me, was just eye-opening. And I would say that was by far the most rewarding of the things that I've done.
Yeah, and I'll give two very quick ones. One was the first case I was actually given to do as my own as an associate at my old law firm was representing a former athlete. I won't name his name, but he played for my hometown team. He was a legend on that team, and it was a right of publicity dispute. It was about how somebody had used his name, image, and likeness without his consent. And I flew out to California to take a deposition of the CEO of the defendant, and we did a lot of work, and I spent a lot of time with this athlete, and I had a poster of this athlete on my wall when I was a kid. And so, like Mike, it's great, and with Andrew, to be able to get to know these people as people. And when the arbitration was over, the lawyer on the other side said, well done. We ended up winning the case. He said, by the way, do you mind if I get an autograph from your client? And I said, you're kidding me, right? We're fighting over the right of publicity and the value of this person's name, image, and likeness and autograph, and now you're just asking to take it from him? And he said, yeah, I wanted to wait until after the arbitration because I knew you might use that against me. And I said, all right, sir, are you willing to sign the autograph? And he could not have been nicer about it and said, send me your kid's name and whatever you want, and I'll send him all the jerseys and everything you want. And it struck me as, wow, this is a person who could have been bitter about it, who ended up getting dragged into a lawsuit about it. And there's that saying, don't meet your heroes. And in this, it was the opposite. It was, wow, this is just a good person. And this is a person who has spent his life making people happy by what he does on a football field. And he continued to do it. And it was just heartening for me to see that he was just a real person and a nice person. And I'm still in touch with him today, and we still chat every now and then. And one of these days I'll be able to say who it actually is. The other one is similar to Mike's story, is I'm working on a podcast. I'll plug myself, Between the Lines podcast, with and the episode that's coming up is with Casey Martin. And many of you may not know who Casey Martin is, but Casey Martin was a pro golfer, one of the best in the country, one of the best in the world, teammates with Tiger Woods at Stanford, and had a disability and was unable to play without the use of a cart, and had to sue the PGA Tour to use a cart. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and he won. And it's a case I teach in my class all the time. And I got to hear Casey talk on a panel, and I was so impressed with the way he talked about the case. And the magistrate judge who had decided the trial was on the panel with him, and they had become friendly after the fact. And to hear Casey talk about not only the legal issues, but also what it was like to be a plaintiff in a case that goes in front of the Supreme Court, and the experience that he had of just being that name, where people don't think about the name in the case, they just think about the case. He thought about it as, I don't care about the case, I just care about the name. I just want to be able to play golf. I want to be able to ride a cart. And it's just been incredible to hear the human side of the story. And again, he was sort of a legal hero for me. And now he's a real hero. He's just a genuinely nice person, and a chance to get to know him and to hopefully tell his story has been one of the highlights of my career. Not over yet. We'll see how it turns out, but has been a real highlight for me.
Awesome insight, guys. We really can't thank you all enough for being here tonight. Three of the brightest minds in sports law, and have obviously accomplished quite a bit professionally, academically, and have kind of paved the way for a lot of young sports law students, and been an inspiration to myself as well. So we thank you guys so much again. And with that, I'll pass it over to Hayes to get things rolling for our next panel. Thanks again, guys.